Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we are going to be talking about an interesting new proposal from the Department of Energy in the United States that could have a pretty significant impact on electric vehicles. We've also got some interesting news on Tesla's Megapack and updates on Tesla in China, as well as actually quite a few other stories, despite it kind of feeling like a little bit quieter of a news day today. All right, looking at the stock, Tesla today up 1.25% to close at $186.79, while the Nasdaq was down 0.4% on the day. So nice to see that outperformance from Tesla. Nice to see a green day after I think pretty much a week straight of Tesla finishing in the red. So nice to see that on the day today. We did get an SEC filing from Tesla today after market close. This is a disclosure of options and shares for Tom Zhu. Of course, we talked about yesterday, has just been added to Tesla's official leadership team. And it goes through just the stock options that he has available. It's a couple million shares here, so definitely a nice cut for Tom. Walking through sort of the options and how they've been earned. Most of these have already been earned in the past. They become exercisable over basically on a monthly basis over the next 4 to 5 years, expiring in 2029 or 2028 through 2030. But a couple million shares there, so the equivalent of around $350-400 million or so, excluding the exercise price, which obviously would have some cost for exercise at that point. So nothing too important for us to know, but if you are curious about kind of that compensation for Tom, that is what has been disclosed today. All right, let's start off here. We've got an update from Automotive News on a proposal from the Department of Energy for how emissions standards are sort of calculated. So it talks about, the headline here talks about how the Energy Department wants to change EV fuel economy formula to make it a little bit more restrictive on how emissions are calculated for EVs, which at first sounds like it's kind of a negative thing, but it turns out this would actually be a relatively positive change, I think, for the electric vehicle industry. Basically, what this is going through is the NHTSA fuel economy standards, which, as we've talked about in the past, outline total fleet requirements for specific model years for auto manufacturers. So, for example, the requirements from NHTSA mean that automakers have to have a fleet average of 49 miles per gallon across the fleet by 2026 model year. And then we've talked about how there are going to potentially be some upcoming changes to that coming later this week. So we'll see, if there is more on that. I think the announcements on that are supposed to come tomorrow. But in the meantime, we have a report. The report here goes through how the Department of Energy is considering or proposing rather, that this calculation be changed for how EVs affect that number. So right now it's pretty inflated actually. For example, they give here the 2022 Ford F-150 Lightning that has a rating under this emissions requirement scheme of 238 miles per gallon. The proposal that they are considering would lower that to 67 miles per gallon from that 238 miles per gallon in terms of how it impacts these things. So if we look at how that compares to the EPA rating, it's basically in line with how the EPA would rate this vehicle. But the concerning thing here, the thing that we've been using so far with NHTSA is that they've been using different requirements that were actually set in place in the year 2000, so 23 years ago, and have not been updated since. So it's based on the EV equivalency factor for miles per gallon. We don't need to go into that, but we will run through just an example of how this would actually affect automakers. So if we look at sort of the current scenario where, Automotive News gave that example of the Ford F-150 Lightning having a rating of 238 miles per gallon, if you combine that with a Ford, any other SUV, internal combustion engine vehicle that's getting 25 miles per gallon, you could have 8 of those vehicles and just one F-150 Lightning averaging out to 49 miles per gallon, which again, that's the requirement as we head towards 2026 from NHTSA. So you've got like an 8-to-1 ratio there. Under a new scenario that lowers the Ford Lightning's mile per gallon equivalent to 67, then you'd be looking at just 30 miles per gallon with that same sort of a mix. Obviously, this would scale as the fleet size grows and all those things, but obviously that dramatically drops down the impact that electric vehicles have on the fleet-wide miles per gallon. So under the new requirements, you would actually have to mix out you go from a 1-to-8 ratio down to less than a 1-to-1 ratio. You'd have the Ford Lightning at 67, another SUV at 25 miles per gallon. You'd have to have just 3/4 of an electric, or 3/4 of an SUV compared to one F-150 Lightning to mix out at that average of 49 miles per gallon. So this would be a stark contrast to where things are at today, and this would put a lot more pressure on automakers to either actually bring up their miles per gallon from their internal combustion engine or plug-in hybrid vehicle fleet to higher levels to make this average better, or ship a lot more electric vehicles to make that better as well. Now, the other thing is there's, of course, credit schemes that are in place, credit systems that are in place that would allow automakers to, raise those averages. Tesla's been a beneficiary of those, purchases from other automakers for many years. This could drive more value for Tesla with those regulatory credits if automakers are unable to meet those requirements. So very interesting in terms of the implications this would have. Again, this is just a proposal at this point, so it's something that we'll want to follow closely because the ramifications, I think this lays out how significant those would be. But they would be a little bit later on because right now this proposal would recommend changing things, or would take effect rather, in 2027 model year vehicles. So basically in the 2026 calendar year. So we'd still be a ways out from any impact of this, but obviously in the planning cycle that would start to have an impact on things probably right now. So again, we'll keep an eye on that, and we're supposed to hear a little bit more on some changes to emission standards later on this week, and I think that'll be tomorrow. All right, next up, we've got an update on Tesla's Megapack. This is coming from one of Tesla's engineers on LinkedIn. And there are a lot of acronyms in here, so we'll just kind of get a lay of the land on what they're talking about here. But basically, it's talking about the control systems for Tesla Megapacks and how those are better than competitors, because Tesla uses a controller hardware in the loop test services on their Megapack platform, which allows them to test their controller system with their hardware before actually shipping it to the customer, versus what this engineer is saying. A lot of other competitors are using a more bespoke process, maybe installing the hardware, then adding the control system, and sometimes that can cause significant downtime, maybe 3 to 4 month project delays based on this comment, multiple million-dollar losses from those delays. So pretty significant potential advantage for Tesla in terms of how this is being structured. This next generation controls platform that Tesla is talking about here. They talk about how, unlike our competitors who display bespoke, and untested RTAC controls, which again, back to the acronyms, RTAC is real-time automation controller. So basically this is the system, the controls that are in place to monitor the system and regulate the operation of the system. So if those are failing, obviously that's bad news for the system in general. It's not going to be able to operate as intended. So with these things tested beforehand, basically Tesla is saying, hey, you're not going to have any of these issues that you're going to have if you choose one, any of these variety of competitors. So just do the Megapack, it's plug and play, drop in, and that's what really Tesla's been focused on since sort of the beginning of the Megapack project. They also talk about how their approach provides EPCs with turnkey control solutions, so kind of what we just talked about there. And just for context again on these acronyms, or these initialisms rather, EPC would be engineering, procurement, and construction companies. So basically all the clients for Megapacks. So kind of cool to see a little bit of insight into what Tesla's doing there and some of the competitive advantages that they have, aside from potentially just scale and cost for the Megapack. All right, next we've got some updates on Tesla in China. So we talked yesterday about wholesale and retail and export sales during March. I mentioned we'll have production shortly. We did get those numbers overnight. So we see production for March was nearly a record for Tesla, just a little short. 87,937 vehicles produced in March. We can see that record was from November, 88,654. So just 700 vehicles short there for Tesla. However, the Model Y did hit record production in March at just over 60,000 vehicles produced, adding another 27,000 or so from the Model 3. So pretty cool to see that. That annualizes out to about 700,000 Model Ys per year. And if Tesla can continue to ramp up Model 3 a little bit more, like we have seen them hit in the past, that should presumably be able to put production for Shanghai above 90,000 a month on good months. Obviously, that can be affected by downtime and things like that. We'll see how this rate continues for Tesla in April and in Q2. But that's good. That means good things for Tesla's cost per vehicle. Obviously, the more vehicles you produce, the more that gets amortized out. So good to see that. And obviously bodes well for Tesla continuing to track towards that 1.8 low bar that they set, and sort of their $2 million vehicle internal target for the year. So really nice to see those production numbers out of Shanghai. If we look at the inventory change, you can see that sales were a little bit more than production for March, and that was consistent throughout the quarter. So while Tesla had built inventory by about 15,000 vehicles, mostly in the second half of last year, now this drained inventory in this first quarter, in terms of just Shanghai we're talking right now, by about 10,000 vehicles. So combine that with the record sales, turned into a pretty good quarter for Tesla there in China. Now, another thing that's been brought up on Twitter today, and there's been a little bit of debate about, is whether or not the Model Y is the best-selling vehicle of the quarter for Tesla in all of China. So Brill Energy doing some nice charting here that shows the Model Y outselling all other vehicles for the entirety of the quarter, so not just March, which would be very exciting for Tesla after those price cuts. However, CNEV Post has a little bit different numbers here. They've got the BYD Song outselling Tesla pretty significantly, 50,000 units or so. So, this is kind of a make your own interpretation situation. Brill Energy outlines this pretty well. The difference is that the BYD Song here is a combination of 3 different vehicles, 3 different variants of the same sort of family, as they put it. So you can see how that breaks down. If you isolate just to these individually, then the Model Y outsells it. If you combine them all, then the Model Y would be short. So it's kind of, again, up to your own interpretation. Here are those vehicles. I definitely think it's fair to separate the plug-in hybrid versus the fully battery electric vehicle, which again, we can see the BEV much lower in terms of volume. But if you look at the 2 plug-in hybrids, they're a little bit similar. I think the Pro versus the Plus on the Song. I think this one's a little bit larger, longer wheelbase, but I think if we were looking at Tesla numbers, we'd probably end up combining those. So again, use your own judgment on that, but just wanted to clarify sort of the conversation around that. Still, obviously, phenomenal sales for the Model Y in China. All right, next we've got an update on the Tesla Semi. So the Sacramento Bee today doing a little bit of a report on Tesla semis at their Sacramento facility. Not Tesla's Sacramento facility, but Pepsi's Sacramento facility. Obviously, we've known that they've got Tesla semis there for quite some time, in addition to Modesto. But they just kind of were talking through some of the excitement around integrating these vehicles into their fleet. So kind of a press event. Since we knew about these, nothing too new to report on those vehicles being there. But one thing that was interesting is that Alberto Ayala, I don't know, getting tripped up on the pronunciation of that, but the director of the Sacramento Metropolitan Air Quality Management District said that the cost of the Tesla Semi is around $250,000 when talking about some of the subsidies that were given to Pepsi regarding these purchases. So we don't know the Tesla Semi cost. This is a clue for us. We don't know for sure if this is accurate. The number here, the 250,000 number, that is the same as the $4.5 million grant divided by 18 trucks, which they say that they helped pay for. So that would seem to be in line with the cost. However, we don't know if Pepsi then chipped in any additional funding on those vehicles. Still, it's kind of our first hint that we've got around the Tesla Semi cost, since Tesla removed that a while back from the actual Tesla Semi, sort of reservation or order page. Now, something else we've talked a lot about is the charging system, and we're continuing to hear 750 kilowatts from Pepsi. That was another comment made by a Pepsi executive at this sort of press event. So we've talked about how the math on that doesn't really check out. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but this is like the 4th or 5th time we've heard this number from Pepsi. So again, I don't know what's going on with the charge rate and why Pepsi keeps mentioning that. We have confirmed that there are not dual charging ports on the Semi, so it's not like there's 2 750 kilowatt chargers that are connecting and charging the Semi at 1.5 megawatts, but it remains a mystery to me on how that exactly is shaking out. And then also on the Semi, we've got an update from Zangler here, who has followed these very closely, talking about how Tesla has actually paused delivery for the time being for any more Semi trucks to Pepsi after delivering about 38. Of course, we know Tesla had that recall from a supplier issue that they're working through, so that may be a factor, but it also sounds like they're kind of just pausing it to take some time to analyze the information that they're learning so far, which I think makes a ton of sense. I think we've all known for a while that this is sort of an initial testing phase. Makes sense to limit it to one customer that Tesla can work really closely with. And this is really, a new vehicle, a completely new segment. So before ramping it too far, makes sense to kind of have those trial runs and see what the customer feedback is. Obviously, Tesla's been doing this testing internally, but a little bit different story when you get it into customers' hands. All right, next we've got a small update on the Cybertruck, just another sighting of the vehicle, doing a little bit of testing in Fremont. Nothing too major to show here, but this is from Rickster902 on the Cybertruck Owners Club forums. Just showing this testing happening. It looks like they are sort of set up to do some testing of the forces within the wheels. So again, just kind of taking a look at these photos. Nothing to add really, but we can see, more ongoing testing, which is always fun on the Cybertruck. All right, next we've got a couple of updates on sort of brand surveys. This one was brought into the Tesla sphere by TSLA today, so some discussion on this online. And it's from American Trucks doing a little bit of brand research. I'm going to skip right to the bottom so we don't have to spend as much time on this, but this was conducted across, you can see some of those things we'll talk about here, but this was conducted across 90 respondents. Basically, they were asking them to draw different logos from memory to get an idea of how recognizable logos are for each different automaker. And then they also asked about perception for these logos, how favorable they were, and how they compared also with mid-journey generated AI logos. So we'll talk about that in a second. But as you can see here, these are some of the drawings from memory. So they're all actually, pretty decent. I think they get the concept right. And, based on this being 90 people and these being pretty good drawings and basically up to perception, I don't put much weight in sort of the rankings that they did in terms of how memorable logos are. So you can see those there. You can see Tesla, I think there's a lot of mention today about Tesla being ahead of Lexus and Toyota. But again, this is not the most robust survey or probably not the most robust methodology. They do also say that Tesla fared a little bit better in terms of favorability, but don't give quite as much information on that. And then the mid-journey part, they generated some mid-journey AI logos and just compared that with original logos to see favorability. But these were the logos, so it's completely different stylistically, obviously, versus what any automaker would use. And I certainly would be glad that Tesla would be sticking with its own logo versus some of these concepts, despite in these rankings, 65% voting that they prefer those AI logos. So kind of interesting on that. But anyway, not too robust. And then we also have a survey here from the Energy Policy Institute at the University of Chicago. So probability on this. Again, we'll go through it pretty quickly, but they looked at the respondents' favorability or likelihood to buy electric vehicles. So you can see that probably the most interesting part about this is favorability or likelihood was higher among Democrats than it was for independents or Republicans. Quite a bit lower there. Looks like maybe about 25%. Would be very likely or somewhat likely amongst Republicans, and a little bit over 50% in those two categories for Democrats. They also asked about reasons that might be prohibitive. As we've followed EVs very closely for many years, not too surprising, cost being the leading reason, charging station availability coming in number 2, and obviously we know Tesla working hard on both of those problems. The biggest reasons to go electric, interestingly, saving on gas. Coming in at the top, tax break actually a little bit lower, although I think it's probably a factor of maybe not fully realizing the effect that could have on cost. Sorry if you hear a little bit of background noise there. But interesting to see that a little bit lower, even though cost is, again, obviously the top reason for potentially not wanting an EV. So again, probably the most interesting thing, the split there with Democrats and Republicans in terms of EVs. All right, moving on, just a few updates from other automakers. Interesting one here from BYD with their new brand, which I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce it, so I'll skip over that one. But with their new brand, which is supposed to be focused on the high end of the vehicle market, they've unveiled their sort of concept car, sort of a roadster-esque vehicle. They're calling it the U9. But a couple of interesting features here, so I'll just play a quick snapshot of their unveiling. They're demonstrating their suspension system, how dynamic it is, controlled with each wheel there, obviously. And something that they did here that was pretty cool is they actually, as you can see there, made it hop by itself just with the suspension system. So it looks a lot cooler in slow motion than it did sort of the first time around, but pretty impressive stuff there, at least from that suspension system for BYD. They also demonstrated how the vehicle would actually be able to drive even if it were, sorry about the volume, even if it were completely missing a wheel. Just with the suspension system still being able to support the weight of that side of the vehicle without that thing there. So pretty cool to see that from BYD. I'm not sure exactly on the timeline of that vehicle, but an interesting development for them on the, again, top of the line market. We've also got an update from Polestar on their next electric vehicle, the Polestar 4. So this is going to be a new SUV from them. They say it's not going to build just off the Polestar 3. It'll be sort of a new imagination of the SUV. And they expect to unveil that at the Shanghai Auto Show on April 18th. So 1 week from today, we'll keep an eye out for that and, take a look at how it looks and the specs and things like that. And then we've also got an update from Hyundai, obviously Hyundai-Kia here, talking about their investment plans to become a top 3 EV manufacturer by 2030, which it's kind of easy to sit there and say like, oh, top 3, like really shooting for the stars there. But with BYD, with Tesla, that's it's probably a pretty realistic goal for any other company to have with the progress that those 2 other companies are making. So they outline their investment plans, about $18 billion they expect to spend to achieve this just in South Korea. And they expect to grow their EV production annually in South Korea to 1.5 million units by 2030, with global volume to about 3.6 million. They say 3.64 million here. I'm not sure why the specific numbers, but 3.64 million by 2030. So they believe that kind of progress at that point would put them third in terms of pure battery electric vehicles. I think Hyundai Kia, they seem to have some pretty decent offerings. Obviously, they've had some issues with batteries and things like that have slowed them down. But, if you look at other competitors, I was just having this conversation with a friend, the other day, who is going to be number 3 behind Tesla and BYD? I think Hyundai Kia, they probably have a decent shot. Volkswagen looked like it would be pretty clearly in that spot, but with all of the executive turnover and things like that, it seems a little bit less clear at this point. Next, we've got an update on GM. They have led a $50 million Series B round for Energy X, which is a lithium refining technology company. I don't know a ton about them, but interesting to see GM sort of putting their, reach into the supply chain that early on, especially when this is, again, a Series B. So, relatively new company. I think they were founded in 2018. It doesn't necessarily mean GM investing $50 million, but as they are leading that round, they could be a little bit less than that, but a sizable portion of that round. And they say that they're also going to help Energy X develop and further refine their refining technology. So interesting to see that from GM. And then last couple of things for today, updates on Twitter and SpaceX. Slate noticed in a court filing from last week that Twitter has now completely seized the Twitter Inc. name. It has been merged into X Corp, which is owned by the parent company X Holdings Corp, which was the company that made the acquisition for Twitter. So nothing new on that front, but the thing that I believe is new here would be the sort of dissolution of the Twitter Inc. company name into X Corp. So I think we kind of all knew that was happening. Again, it's just the company name, so it doesn't necessarily mean a lot. Obviously, the brand as of today is still Twitter, but kind of an interesting note there. And Elon tweeting out, probably in response to this, just a single X late last night. All right, finally then, I know it's been a little bit rocky of an episode. I apologize for that, but finally then, we do have an update from SpaceX on the Starship orbital test flight, which should be hopefully next week. We'll see. Obviously, the timeline on that can be highly variable. They are still waiting for FAA approval, but they've given us a lot more information. We have a date from them at no earlier than April 17th, which would be next Monday. But again, some of those, timelines can shift around. But the most interesting part of this is, the very specific walk down through all the milestones of this orbital test flight from SpaceX. So you can see kind of the countdown beginning 2 hours out, all the steps that they're going to take until the launch, which they say excitement would be guaranteed for. They show us a diagram of how the test flight is going to work. So exactly what they're going to be doing with the booster, what they'll do with Starship, and the resulting water landings for both of those later on in the test flight. So should be awesome. Obviously, that's going to be a major, major milestone for SpaceX that we'll have to look forward to next week. And it's really exciting to see these plans start to solidify. All right, that'll wrap it up for today. So as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also find me on Twitter @Tesla Podcast. And we'll see you tomorrow for the Wednesday, April 12th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.